Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning. Welcome to a re-review here of Tactics Ogre Reborn. So, this is kind of a bit of a personal project here. Essentially, back in the ancient days of 2022, Tactics Ogre Reborn had come out, a remake of one of my most played things of all time, of a game that I absolutely adored to pieces, one of the most unique things I'd ever played, and basically, I had a few weeks. Technically, it was like a month or so, but as between family chaos, between a bunch of other stuff I had to deal with, long family trips, going back and forth across Michigan, there was a lot of things that I wanted to cover in that review that I either simply didn't understand yet or didn't, nobody really knew as of yet. So what I wanted to do was essentially do a re-review, covering the stuff that we've learned over the years, covering, the good, the bad, all that sort of thing. Because this is a game that I personally consider to be an absolute masterpiece, and I will probably mention, though, it isn't necessarily for everybody. So, let's go ahead and start going over this thing, just kind of covering what it did as a remake, what it does in general, and what makes this game as amazing as it is, if you're the right person to enjoy it. So, first and foremost, what exactly is Tactics Ogre anyway? Well, effectively what we're looking at here is kind of a long-form interactive tragedy simulator. So it is an SRPG, it's one of the classics of the genre, but one thing that you should know going into this thing is how much it bends over backwards to throw tropes out the window. Alright, this is not a hero story. At best, a lot of times when you're playing through this thing, it's a redemption arc, okay? This is a story in which if you are looking for the sort of like the classic RPG experience of I am the good boy, give me the good boy prizes, please, it oftentimes will immediately spit in your face. Because this is, well, meant to be, again, a genocide. It respects its tone, its setting, everything else. But that's kind of the funny thing. It's weird to see this the situation where it's like this dark tone, but you still have these sort of interesting kind of mythology vibes going on in there. There is all of this sort of like mystical, magical, whatever else stuff going on in the background. And it's cool to see these like callbacks to ancient mythology and stuff like that. Like with the fairies, it's like, oh, it's cute. It's a little, Tinkerbell type situation over there. It's like, oh wait, no, hold on. We're doing Celtic fairies. These guys are mind fuckers. Okay, good to know. So yeah, that's the kind of setting that we're talking about here. It is effectively in tone a Eastern European historical conflict of sorts, with fantasy stuff going on, but everything that you're doing is going to be interactive. Now, I'm going to try to avoid story spoilers as much as possible, but just know that this is the kind of game that is so interactive with its story that even if you go and tell somebody the exact plot beats that you ran into, the next guy will not be running into those. It changes its story. It technically has 3 main routes, but each of those have a bunch of variations as you go along the way, based off things like your reputation, who's in your party, who lived or died in the background or during fights, what people think of you in general. Sometimes it's even down to something oddly specific, like, if you get into a fight with a relative and you just happen to, mention something that later on influences their decisions. So there's a lot of stuff like that. I'm going to try to avoid spoilers as much as possible, but I personally don't think this is a game that you could even intentionally spoil, so it is what it is. Now, another thing to mention for context here is that this is effectively a remake of a remake while also taking some nods and paying respect to a fan remake of the same thing that it's remaking. So there's a lot of stuff kind of wrapped up in that little package. So way back in the day, back in ye old 90s and all that, we had the original Tactics Ogre. This came out on the SNES, on the PS1. It later got a port over to the Saturn. Interesting little bit of trivia here is that for anyone that was unfamiliar, the people that made Triangle Strategy were actually the ones behind porting it to the PlayStation 1. So that's kind of neat. Also, part of the reason that I give them so much crap, because they really knew better in terms of making an interactive story. Dang it, make your choices matter. So, that being said, there's a lot of things on the screen here right now that actually were not there at the time. So, looking back at the original, you see this little item bar right here? That basically was your character. They used to have built-in, some built-in features, like stuff like Valkyries being able to go swim in the water. But most of the characters were fairly basic. They had a weapon specialization, which gave them a different animation when they went and swing, go and swing a weapon of some sort. The Valkyries would go and spin their spear. A knight would do this little kind of arc with their sword and all that. Archers, well, they actually couldn't think of an animation for the archer, hilariously enough. They directly admitted that in an interview, so they didn't actually get archer animations up until Knight of Lotus on the Game Boy Advance. But anyways, they gave them some unique animations if they were specialized in a weapon, but the effects of most of those systems were minor. Like, for example, you had an element associated with a unit, but this would only give them a very, very minor amount of additional damage if they were matching that element in some way. They technically took some additional damage from an opposing element, but again, we're talking single digits. It was a really, really minor amount that was mostly there for flavor more so than actual planning. The interactive story, the way that anybody could die at any time and the story would simply adapt, that was the core purpose of the game. Everything else was just kind of there to help serve that. The strategy was still fun. It was kind of neat that you could do things like beat down a skeleton and then just go convince them to join your army. How the skeleton with no ears is willing to negotiate, but the zombie over there of the person that was just zombified was not. That's anyone's guess. Anyways, so with all of that taken into consideration, that system was fairly basic. Again, interactive story was the entire premise of everything that it was doing. You had 4 slots per character, technically had 4 spell slots, but not really. Most of the time it was like 2 or 3. And then you had one that was reserved for what these moves are down here, which are your finishing moves. They weren't called that yet, but this is all to basically say that a lot of the ideas of stuff was there. Most of it wasn't really quite there yet. Like most of these special moves were stuff that used your health as a resource because they hadn't quite figured out how to charge them for having, this special move. They insisted that wizards were the only ones that could have an MP bar, so everybody else was just like, well, I guess we're eating health now. I will hit you with my own health, dang it. But yeah, so it had these special moves. They were relegated to the ultra late game unless you did the optional mega dungeon at the very end that was completely randomized in that version. You didn't actually get access to those moves. Most of your spells were fairly basic. You get some heals, you get some basic casts. And yeah, you have a couple that you can give to most of your units, but at the time, most casters were running around with maybe 2 spell slots, and then 4 pieces of equipment, which interestingly enough was a combination of their consumables and all of their equipment. So they would be running around with like a spear, a helmet, a healing item, and maybe a buff item or something like that. It was a system that, again, was largely basic. It was trying to stick to the sort of board game roots of the series, because this series in general is about kind of living through what would more or less be a historical conflict with a mystical spin on it while living through the chaos of a board game. So like Ogre Battle, before this one, was very similar to a sort of like pause-and-go RTS type situation, but a lot of what happened was determined by cards that you draw, that sort of thing. Now, the reason that this is relevant is because we then took a very interesting turn once we got to its PSP version. So this essentially took us over to an idea where they really wanted to remake the system. They wanted people to live in this world, experience it more, okay? With the original, due to the basic combat mechanics, many would just get frustrated at the fact that they were losing soldiers. So they reworked the system in which you were leveling up classes instead of individual people. This was an odd system, to say the least, because this meant that if you got a brand new class, or like a unique unit or something like that, you had to actually level up the entire class, and that was oftentimes, frustrating in a completely different direction. People were frustrated at the lack of skills in that original version, so they went almost full D&D with it, adding systems in which they had a 10-slot system. They had infinite amount of spells that they could learn. They could use spell books as a consumable item. Equipment was a lot more locked down all of a sudden, so like it was limited to classes, and they also had a level requirement on there, because this was like the golden age of we're putting MMO mechanics in everything. So you had level capped equipment, you had a crafting system that was strictly an upgrade system, and also in a game where you could like save whenever you wanted, it just screwed you over by deciding, hey, you know that basic upgrade to your crossbow that you just got at the shop? Your crossbow will explode 60% of the time, or not 60, sorry, about 40% of the time. So all those pieces of crafting materials that you went and gathered together extensively, yeah, that stuff is just gone now. You're welcome. We just decided this needed a random dice roll for some reason. So I actually have an entire video of just the absolute plethora of bizarre decisions in that version. But it was very well intentioned. They had a lot of really cool ideas, you know, things like ranking up your weapon when you used it. You fight a particular race, you're getting better at fighting that particular thing. You wield an element, you get better at using that element. And for those interested in that sort of like D&D-esque, really nitty-gritty kind of thing that wouldn't mind a very strange leveling system, that's where we have the fan overhaul that I mentioned earlier. It's known as One Vision. It is an absolute masterpiece in its own right. But yeah, it is going to take a little bit of extra effort to set up, and I'll include a link in the description as well. But it honestly, both One Vision and Reborn, they redo everything in such a different way that I personally find myself bouncing between the two, because essentially what we have is sort of the engineering prowess of something like One Vision combined with the elegance and design of something like Reborn. So honestly, just both of them are a completely different mindset. They exist as two different rule sets of what is effectively the same system. Both of them are attempting to immerse you in this world, this story, this interactive kind of simulation of sorts through completely different means. Where One Vision makes you feel the dirt under feet, you can stick your hands in, you know, in the dirt and feel the worms and all that. Reborn does it through setting the scene really well, through keeping the pacing really tight. And yeah, actually giving you a lot of interesting flexibility, which is what we'll go into here. Because I have seen a lot of comments over the years essentially criticizing things like the smaller amount of slots, the way that equipment is handled, and that's the thing. The way that everything comes together is just like, it just oozes elegance. All right, so we'll get to the nitty-gritty of all of that in just a little bit of a second here. But we're working our way there. We'll get there. We'll get there. So anyways, what we want to discuss here next is what the purpose is of the Reborn version, because they wanted everyone to experience this story. They didn't want them to keep hitting roadblocks of just like instantly seeing half their party wiped like they saw in the original version. So they wanted to essentially loosen up some of the life and death requirements. The ESP version took that a little bit too far by giving you what was functionally immortality for your units. Everyone had 3 lives. You had ways to get those lives back. If somebody died, you could transfer all of their skills minus whatever accumulated experience they had towards the next rank just over to another guy. So there was very little punishment for death in that version, and so oftentimes it felt like there was no death in a story that is all about death. And then from there we have the Reborn version, where we have the sort of... we have something closer to Final Fantasy Tactics in terms of death system. It does exist, but unlike FFT, it's a system that expects you to lose people along the way. It expects you to be okay with that loss, keep marching forward. It is the game of marching forward through death and mud and everything else to see where the story takes you, right? You are expected not to play it necessarily as a standard RPG type of experience, but as just closer to something like a D&D campaign, that you accept your mistakes, accept your losses, you keep on going forward, because it's the wrinkles that make all of that kind of stick, right? So, with that being said, just know that, yeah, when it comes to the story, any named character can die in a multitude of different ways. You've got several different situations where it seems like, you know, hey, I did the good guy thing, why didn't I get brownie points for that? When in reality, you might have unknowingly been screwing somebody over in a way. I think probably the thing that I want to address here first, before we start getting into mechanics, is when it comes to one of the decisions in particular. Right? This is a fairly... on paper, it seems fairly binary, but I want to give you an idea of the layers involved when it comes to sort of how the story goes. Because depending on your sort of main route through the story, as well as who's made it up to that point, it can vary itself up in a lot of different ways. And so one of the potential scenarios that can play out essentially sees you attacking a castle. You're more or less pulling a Hannibal, in which you're essentially going through the Alps to go fight a guy. You're trying to cut off one of the faction's heads. Now, the thing is, when you're fighting that faction, there's one particular commander you're looking for, but he's got a lot of sub-commanders all over the place. And so, trying to find that guy, you find one of the others instead. Now, this guy spots you as you're going through the mountains. You fight his scouting party in the mountains, and technically your only objective there is to injure him, enough that he ends up running away. The reason that this ends up mattering is because it basically puts a whole conspiracy into motion. One in which you effectively have this guy that seems like he spotted you, he knows you're coming, and then you're looking at the cutscenes, conversations, and news stories in the background. It's like he's sent all of his best people off to sort of like the far reaches, places where you're not. So he knows ahead of time that you're coming, but he sent away his best people, takes up his remaining loyalists, essentially sets them up for a dramatic last stand in a giant open non-defensible room, and then he takes everybody else that was disloyal to their faction and locks them up in a safe area. He then goes and does his big dramatic fight, and he leaves his dad to essentially take command of the place when he ends up passing, because the lineage of their whole situation passes to the next surviving family member, which would be that guy. At which point, that guy essentially asks you one question. She only asks, "Hey, are we your enemy?" And this is kind of like a test to see if you've been paying attention. This game in general is just, it's as rewarding as you're willing to sort of pay attention to its shenanigans, as you will. Because effectively the question that he asks is, "Are we your enemy?" Now, what he means by this is his faction, the Galgastani. So you essentially have three different factions. You got the Walser, the Galgastani, and the Bakram. So the Bakram are basically the rich folks up north. They are the reason that Lotus, this is the outside faction. Closest equivalent would be like, think of the U.S. Showing up during everything in the Middle East or whatever else. Not as of recently. This analog worked a lot better before the last few months. But anyways, it's just like there's a thing. They are called in to serve as sort of a peacekeeping force, being sort of bigger brother country in that particular instance. Essentially, the way that it plays out is just you have one group, so the Galgastani, they're the ones that are effectively trying to genocide the Wallister, who were sort of the previous, I guess it's a kind of like owner faction of the place. You have the Bakram that had split off in the north, and they're the ones that are... They're essentially the ones that, they end up with the most resources, the most money, the most defensible positions, because their push was to use this Lotus faction to then take over the island. Lotus said, "Hey, no, stopped at this one peninsula, we're good here, this is safe, this is defensible. Our job was to protect you, not to give you this island." So they stop right there. And you, as one of the Wallister here that are getting attacked at the south, your job is effectively to try and end the conflict by whatever necessary. So the guy that you're talking to is from the Galgastani faction. They have been genociding your guys' faction for generations at this point. They officially declared a blood war and stuff like that. So it's basically kill on sight between these two. And so that's why he directly asks you, like, are we your enemy? Because what he's trying to say is, if you are playing the politician, if you are playing the good guy game, the answer is right there. No, you're not our enemy. We should be friends and whatever else. We can all just get along. Then the other answer sounds like it's exactly the same. I should probably point out, a lot of these questions may seem binary. Some of them are situational, like depending on your reputation or other factors, they may not be the simple, like, switch A or B type of route choice that you think. Because in this case, it actually doesn't change anything for the story itself. What it changes is your reputation with these people in particular, as well as a lot of the conversations that may happen with your representatives of this faction. So, for example, what ends up happening is, if you go for the other option, it's, again, it sounds the same, but it's, how can you be? Essentially implying this deeper understanding that nobody chose to be here. This is a conflict that is, like, it's been going on for generations. This is just something that everybody's spinning the wheels on at this point. Nobody knows how to stop it. So it's a, how can you be our enemy when none of us chose this shit, At which point, essentially, his choice is, instead of leading the faction, he just gives you a guy. He's like, "Hey, got this cool Dragoon unit for you. Seems pretty nifty. Maybe he'll help you out. You know, he leads some people. He was an ex-commander. Whatever else, you know, cool Dragoon guy. Looks like a badass. All right, whatever. And then, if you're paying attention and you let every conversation play out, you hear in the background that this old man basically just jumped off a tower somewhere, disappeared into the forest. Who knows? Long story short, he disappeared. Essentially meaning that ownership, like, this place is now headless. There's nobody running that particular faction. This is never really brought to your attention very much. It's only if you're going and reading through reports. If you're going through and, you know, let's say going through these various talks in the background, and you see that there's all kinds of different things constantly going on in the background. Alrighty, so I wanted to throw in a little bit of an editing note here to finish explaining what this little conspiracy over there was all about. See, there's a lot of little things like this. As you play through the story multiple times, you'll generally figure out that a lot of people are kind of lying about what they're doing, where they're doing it, you know, essentially doing their own little plans in the background while telling you something completely different, because, you know, hey, we're just enemies oftentimes means, okay, look, I am contractually obligated to kick your ass, but also, I'm trying to not die over in this direction and trying to save these people over here, etc., etc. So there's a lot of these little conspiracies like this. But the reason that this guy in particular, that's not the guy that we're looking at, this is actually the recruit that they give you, but the reason that he does the things that he does is primarily because he's trying to save his people there. The consistent through line you see over the course of multiple playthroughs is that no matter where his story takes him, he's trying to essentially save the rebel faction of his people there, because they're kind of the sensible minority there. A huge chunk of the people that he's supposed to be trying to go and protect are way too willing to go off on their own respective death marches, and so he's just trying to end that cycle just like you are. He can't really officially join you, because then those same, you know, rebel factions would simply turn on him too, because they're essentially seen as, you know, lifelong blood enemies, more or less. He can't exactly go and join the Bakram, they're too far away, and Lotus is more than willing to run these guys over, because they're kind of on opposing sides as well. So he's kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. So the reason that he does the things that he does is to legally, on a technicality, change ownership of the castle, which they are the sole occupants of, over to the Wellister Resistance in that particular case. A situation in which, effectively, the leaders then would be the sort of local kind of rebels from his side there. They would more or less then be able to take over and essentially be on more peaceful terms with people that were otherwise their lifelong enemies, effectively allowing everyone to sort of begrudgingly agree with each other on account of the fact that they don't technically have to fight each other anymore. The fascinating thing about this, again, is that as you go and read his profile on different playthroughs, you see that, yeah, people question him about what the split is in his faction, why he didn't do more to squash them out, and whatever else. And it mentions, like, yeah, no, he went to his execution refusing to say a word on what was going on over there. So it's just kind of cool to see that not only do people's profiles and everything else change over the course of multiple playthroughs, but depending on what people think of each other, you know, who lived, died, to share what information, the kind of state of the world is very different on even situations where you're doing the same route and stuff like that. There's just a lot of little things that can change along the way, and so oftentimes this leads to this feeling where you kind of go back to an old save file, and it's like, oh yeah, I remember this exact timeline over here. And by the way, when I say timeline, I should probably mention that, later on in the game, this is not really much of a spoiler, it is, in fact, the post-game, you do have the option to actually go and screw with the timeline, change things around, potentially go back in harder or easier versions, and essentially just kind of mess around with things, see what happens, potentially change your own personal sort of primary timeline as long as you carry that progress forward. It's kind of interesting that it actually has its own mechanics for time travel, in which, yeah, if you change one thing and go forward, nothing has changed. You actually have to push that bubble forward. Otherwise, you have a whole string of different time paradoxes throughout your entire timeline. It's kind of wild. But yeah, so essentially, this ultimately kind of culminates here with this other unit that's carrying along with you, right? Now, he is, you know, just kind of a dude, but as you carry along, if you bring him along to fights that happen to involve people from that castle, and what's interesting is that they actually use the bonus objective system that they added in this version to give you an incentive to carry him along. So if it ever seems kind of random where they're like, huh, so they're saying to bring a Dragoon along, those guys have a bunch of golems. That's odd. Why do we get a bonus objective for bringing along a unit that doesn't help us here? Yeah, that's usually the game's hint of saying, hey, so we're not going to, like, spoil it, but maybe bring that Dragoon we just gave you, because he's probably going to be your first, if not one of your first Dragoons on that particular playthrough, and he's a pretty cool dude, so you should probably bring him along. And what's interesting is that if you do bring him along to meet everybody and listen through all of their conversations, which, by the way, not exactly the most telegraphed thing, I will say, especially, like, all of this is actually to recruit somebody that you potentially could have saved earlier if you go out of your way to make sure they don't die in a fight. Essentially allowing somebody that is an enemy to all factions to potentially join your party. Yeah, no, it's funny because she's so stubborn that apparently he's the only one that can convince her to switch sides if he's gone through his full redemption arc. It's not even a redemption arc, it's more of a gigantic worldwide apology tour of like, hey, sorry for burning down your home, sorry for killing your people, sorry for, you know, the incident. Essentially, yeah, he's got plenty to atone for, which essentially does allow for fun little roleplay moments, like going and switching him to a wizard that is primarily there, attempting to use pacifist spells to try to subdue things without ever fighting. It's just one of those little things I find amusing, but yeah. Essentially, it sort of changes the overall feel of that entire playthrough, potentially, for somebody that's paying attention. And really, it's just, again, that idea of constantly rewarding you if you're paying attention, but also potentially giving you something completely different if you didn't. Essentially, in both ways, you have different things playing out. It's not really the Fire Emblem thing where you're losing out on content on account of somebody not being there. Oftentimes, it's sort of the tone and feel of everything that ends up changing as you play through. So, for example, Mr. Canopus, one of the most kind of verbal characters in the story there. He isn't somebody that directly puts his finger on the scale of the actual story very much, but he's essentially a situation in which, over the course of a playthrough, if he dies early on, that entire playthrough feels like it loses a lot of levity. A lot of the scenes where he would pop in, you know, throwing around jokes or whatever else, are suddenly just like, oh man, this sucks. We're enemies to everybody, and this sucks. So yeah, that's it's one of those kinds of situations. Now, that's not to say that everybody's got a bajillion, you know, zillion lines of dialogue absolutely everywhere, but it does mean that it tends to sprinkle these things about in kind of unexpected ways. So it feels good to use these particular characters. It, you know, it also just feels just as good to run along with just your generics. A little bit of a balance note before we continue back to whatever I was talking about before this editing note here is that, yeah, your uniques, they get a slight stat advantage over your other guys, but ultimately, and especially by the post-game, everybody's more or less the same. One of the things that they really fixed from the PSP version is when it came to stats and levels and such. Because, yeah, your one-time level-up bonuses and stuff in that one were exactly that, one-time level-ups. So oftentimes this meant that if you lost a character, well, you did not get a... You basically would have to go and, let's say, have cards drop over and over to actually get them as good as they were before. That, yeah, you had all these kind of like one-time effects and whatever else. You were leveling up classes instead of people. It was kind of complicated. If you knew what you were doing with that system, there was some fun stuff to cheese, but, like, this didn't need that weird level up system. The way that this one plays out, where it's got the permadeath on your characters, but you can just simply go to the store and recruit another one, and they are going to be equivalent to the other guy, because these are, like, this is an island full of people that are basically lifelong soldiers at this point, just trying to end a war. Yeah, it makes sense that everyone's roughly going to be on the same level. Everyone's just a dude. Even somebody that's been around, you know, for multiple conflicts, like Mr. Canopus here, he's still just a dude. He's not exactly reaching superhuman levels until you get to the post-game. That's one of the things they really tightened up on this one, that if you, like, you can break through things very well if you know what you're doing, exploiting weaknesses, defenses, all of that sort of thing. But if you want to statistically turn somebody into a walking demigod, that's saved until after you complete the story, and all of the mystical stuff starts happening. Well, okay, it doesn't start happening. It's always been happening. So last little note on this little editing note here is when it comes to the sort of mystical side of things, because I do see this question come up every now and then, of like, okay, you know, FFT players were oftentimes confused reaching the end of that particular story, because it's like, okay, we were doing politics up to this point. What's with the deities walking the earth now? What are we doing with that? So that is something that Matsuno loves to do in a lot of these things, where it's like a grounded political story and then stuff goes crazy. But I will say this one is politics all the way through. Like, when you reach the finale of the game, you are still there to finish off your political enemies, more or less. They're trying to do other stuff, but it's probably worth noting for the greater context of the series. You don't technically have to have played the rest of the series to get anything for this. It just kind of adds extra context to stuff. But the Lotus faction, the guys that are sort of the outside superpower assisting and putting their finger on the scales here. Yeah, so Tartaros, like the main bad guy, he is the protagonist of another game. You have Canopus and the other Zenobians. They are the protagonist team from a completely different game. They've all been from other conflicts at this point, which means that they've collected stuff off in the background. So, later on when you see things like one of them having the ability to teleport, that's not really outside of the realm of normalcy when it comes to the Lotus faction trying to figure out what's going on with the island's like weird supernatural relics hanging out in the background. That's on account of the sort of greater lore implications of the fact that there was a gigantic, basically heaven and hell war, the ogre battle that started off the series there, and all the remnants of that are still scattered about all over the place, including what are basically magical equivalent of nukes, including, portals to hell and whatever else. The Zenobians, by this point, canonically have closed 5 of those. And yeah, so you don't have to know any of the rest of this stuff, but it's just like, for the background, all of this stuff is always just sort of hanging out just below the surface. So, like, when you personally get access to a lot of those things is on account of a random earthquake that happens on top of the island partway through the story if you're reading the news, and you actually can fight a bunch of other treasure hunters on the way over there to essentially kind of claim control of the place, and then you can just start, like, digging out all of your fancy equipment and letting people have the ability to fly and teleport and walk on water and walk on lava and stuff like that. So it's the setting in which everything is very grounded as a standard day-to-day thing, but that stuff is out there for somebody willing to find it. You know how how in Final Fantasy Tactics, the Midlight's Deep was very kind of random seeming. It was just sort of over there. How did it get there? Why was it so short? This seems kind of like a random chapter 4 edition. In here, it's because it was it came from this. Everything from FFT is essentially a boil down of stuff that came from Tactics Ogre originally, and so Midlight's Deep is sort of a distilled version of Palace of the Dead, which was a randomized 100-floor dungeon in the classic version, and then it became a set 115-floor dungeon with shortcuts in the later versions. And the PSP version was weirdly stingy with its drops, like to the point that you could go through the entire thing and get like 3 or 4 cool items. In this one, they actually moved a lot of the items around, so like craftable books and stuff like that, your advanced crafting manuals and things, basically have a library section early on, whereas before they were just in random locations on random dudes all over the place. I'm sorry, I don't feel like hunting down that one skeleton that spawns like 25% of the time to hope that exercising him gives me a crafting book that's, to craft some better gloves. Why would I know to look for that? There was no hint towards it. In this case, yeah, they basically have a crafting library because the Palace of the Dead is supposed to be like the inverse in-universe version of like magical DARPA, more or less, that got buried underground. You have sort of just weird relics from all over the place. You can combine those relics to get better versions. So like the standard ones you get are barely better than your usual equipment, and then you can upgrade them more and more to get better versions of stuff. So, like, that's what's going on with this crossbow over here, where it's essentially a crossbow that's been... It's got a couple of upgrades. This is still relatively basic, I suppose. But yeah, you get fancier and fancier ones with bigger and bigger bonuses. You combine all these bonuses together. And this actually, incidentally, is why we have things like a few of the character unlock requirements changing in this one as well. Where before you had a character like Deneb, who's like this sort of hidden witch character in every one of these games. The requirement to get her was to get 30 of a fairly rare-ish drop in Palace of the Dead before, sell it to her for absolutely no reason, because you're not getting much money for it. It's an item associated with her, but why would you sell it to her for $10? And then also, like, genocide a bunch of dragons and then buy their souls in order to make a weapon. It was kind of random. Like, unless you had the guide, you weren't finding that. So this time around, they actually reworked a lot of things to where if you upgrade 3 of these relics in her shop, which unlocks at the same time, that's part of the requirement to unlock her. And additionally, those elemental souls I was talking about earlier are a consumable weapon in all of these, but they are a very they're a very effective end game weapon. They're something you get scattered throughout the entire story. But effectively, you sell a dragon to the shop, you get a hold of one of these to purchase. They're very expensive, but they're basically a magical rocket launcher, more or less. And the cool thing about this is that, yeah, around that point, her shop is something you'd probably want to visit to get new spells anyway. You're potentially getting those relics at the same time, unlocking those anyway. You're probably figuring out this dragon thing, selling those dragons to get these weapons anyway. And they changed the requirement to only needing to sell her one of each dragon type, including a Hydra. And ultimately, I know I'm kind of getting off track here, but the point is you're actually likely to get her on accident. The odds are not 0. They're not amazing, but if you get invested enough, you can still do that on accident. That actually happened on a playthrough once. I was very excited. And yeah, actually, I guess while I'm already doing this, I should probably also note, you might notice your version of the Vartan doesn't have Dragon Slayer. Yeah, there are set effects and stuff like that later. They expanded the amount of item slots in this version, which I don't think I actually addressed that particular thing. And so this does mean that you can do things like putting Dragon Slayer on a guy with a crossbow. You take the Vartan with his high movement, his crossbow that has a anti-dragon bonus on there. You take a finisher that has a triple hit on there, and essentially he's going and smacking a dragon for like 4,000 with his automatic crossbow. It's like this kind of combination, sort of like card game-esque combination. I just love it so much. And anyway, I don't know where I'm placing this, if I've gone on about the skills and balance and all that yet, so we'll get to that when we get to it, if I haven't gotten to it yet. And back to, I think I was talking about the Warren reports. We've traveled far a ways on this little tangent. Let's go ahead and continue on. So between the profiles of absolutely everybody that's here, there's a very wide cast of characters that can potentially change very dramatically between different playthroughs, as well as what people are directly saying, what they're indirectly saying. This is a story in which everybody is sort of keeping their cards close to their chest for the most part. If somebody's open about something, they're either one of the very few, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed of the bunch in the entire story, or they're bullshitting you. And that's the fascinating thing about this. Because every time that you go through, you find more little details like this to potentially look through. More little details to go and pick up on. Like, every random leader that you run into has a backstory, has a reason that they are involved in the war. Maybe their family was involved. Maybe they're, maybe they personally had some connection there. And so, for example, like this guy over here, the only reason that he's ever even fighting you is because he's trying to make money to save his kid. Interestingly enough, this story actually used to be a lot darker, because on his body you find a copy of a spell to turn somebody into a zombie back in the original SNES version. So they changed it so that he's just looking for medicine to cure her instead of having this backup plan of zombifying her instead. Yeah, kind of a weird note. I think the reason that they changed that is he's technically not the right class to use that spell. And its mechanics changed entirely, and just turning him fully into a necromancer or lich would have looked really weird in context. Like, oh, hey, here's good guy bounty hunter. Sir, he's wearing a skull. And seems to be practicing occult rituals in public. He's casting using body parts. That's kind of strange. Anyways, so yeah, as far as all that stuff is concerned, like the thing that I love about Tactics Ogre is just every layer you pull back, there's just more back there worth look into. So yeah, it's a case of kind of consistent depth into it, which is when we circle back to what we were talking about earlier when it comes to the mechanics. See, upon release, this version was actually criticized a few times, I say a few times, a bit, in terms of its changes, because a lot of those changes actually were misunderstood. So, for example, we have 4 spell slots. Remember that this is effectively sort of trying to cement the legacy of multiple different remakes at once. The problem with the original was its mechanics were way too simple to really be too much of a strategy game. The problem with the second one is that its its mechanics were more so complicated than they were complex. As in, you had situations where about 90%, and I do mean literally like 90%, you had 10 skill slots for every character. But stuff like your element, which previously was just built into the unit, was a skill that you had to grind up, and it took an exceptionally long time to do that. Many of those grindable skills took so long that, for the sake of context, when I was doing a solo run of the PSP version, over the course of that entire playthrough, plus completing the exceptionally long DLC, which is even longer than the main campaign, and essentially having only one character training this one skill through a huge chunk of the game, you had Deflect, which is your ability to use your weapon to flick away arrows, and he was the only one in the party getting targeted by every arrow over the course of the entire playthrough. So this was essentially 3 different playthroughs of the story, more or less, because I did actually end up screwing up a few things. As well as the DLC, which includes going through the 100 floor dungeon, which got expanded to the 115 floor dungeon in that version, in order to actually get to the end and do all of your time travel shenanigans and whatever. But even through all of that, he got to a rank of 3 out of 8, right? Like, that's how slow stuff was. So it could take exceptionally long to get them to any point of usefulness. And so what they redid in this version was that they took the really, really boring skills and they just worked them into the system. So like the element, instead of ranking up your element, ranking up your attenuate for that element, your augment for that element, instead it's just, hey, your element is part of your character again, just like it was back in SNES. But in this particular version, it's essentially maxed out in its effectiveness, more or less. Your character is that element instead of using that. So, for example, a water character fighting, let's say, a fire character will get a 30% bonus for most of their attacks. So, let me explain how this works, because the damage types are actually different in this version compared with everything else. Instead of being static, you essentially have different damage types achieving different roles. Melee attacks are your sort of standard RPG-esque damage. You take weapon, you apply your stats to the weapon, you hit real good. But this is what I love about this simulation here. Everything is taken into account. You see this over here, the weight of your weapon, your recovery time. So you spend 33 recovery time. This is adding to this counter on the top right in order to swing the weapon. Essentially using the weapon under its natural characteristics, its natural weight, whatever that may happen to be. Its weight is 8, which is essentially slowing down your character over time. Its recovery time is that much. That's how much it takes to use this particular tile, use this particular item. The weight of everything is taken into consideration, but when you select this tile, you are selecting, I'm using this spear this way to hit that guy. Using the attack power of the spear, using the bonuses of the spear, in this case using the debuff on the spear as well, and equipping whatever skills the weapon has given you. Alright, that is the action that you are choosing to take. However, then let's say you go and spend some of their built-up MP, you use one of their finisher moves over here. Okay, this recovery time is 15. So now, instead of swinging the weapon normally, now they can target a specific area with one of these moves. They are essentially taking a swing twice as fast at the cost of some of their points. In other cases, this actually has different applications. Like with these elements, if it's neutral, it's using their own element. So like, let's say attacking somebody gives roughly a 30% bonus. If your weapon is that same element, it adds another 10%. If your attack is that same element, it's adding more as well. But on the physical side of things, you get that big upfront bonus for hitting somebody, and then you get a little bit more for matching it. But let's say you have a character that doesn't exactly match that element. Like let's say this one right here, that she is essentially an earth element, and she's about to go fight a water unit. Okay, her earth element is neutral. It doesn't really do anything extra versus that unit. But she can go save a few points over here and, let's say, apply something like a thunder wave and punish them despite being a different element. Essentially, these finishers, which technically previously had these elements associated with them, and it's something that you would wind up, now they're a way to almost do sort of like Pokemon-esque builds, where you have units that specifically have counters to other elements depending on their weapon choices, depending on the sort of things that they end up going and bringing along, and that is a really fun system to play around with, because it effectively allows you to adapt on the fly more than worry about your standard RPG grind kind of stuff. Like, you remember how I said earlier that this is a game that likes to go against the grain, that it likes to do kind of the opposite of what every other RPG likes to do. That's what we're looking at here. So, for example, this guy, despite avoidance being one of his lowest stats, is actually an evasion build. Effectively, what we see is that this guy is, well, he's running a bunch of various skills. He's running a particular weapon choice, and he's carrying particular items with him. One fascinating change that they made with this one is that they locked in scaling bonuses for buffs and debuffs throughout the entire game. Once again, just because it feels like a tradition at this point, I have to point a finger at triangle strategy, because that was what ended up breaking down a lot of its cooler systems in that one, because they didn't scale. Many older RPGs had this problem. This one is no exception. Its previous PSP and earlier versions did not scale percentage-wise. So, for example, that 10 or 11 damage tick from poison mattered a lot in the early game, but it was worthless in the late game. So effectively what we see here is that every time that there's a buff or debuff applied, it's going to scale, and this scales dramatically farther than any stats. Stats technically make up your character, but it's how they're played that really matters. It's strategy over RPG in every sense of the word, and I love it for that. It allows you to roleplay in the classic sense of playing through the story. Every person is a person, but unlike many other games out there, it does not reward you for metagaming like that. By the way, I apologize if that clicking in the sound background is coming through. That's kind of whatever. So, for example, in this case, he's got 2 Jewels of the Avatar that he carries on his belt. This will guarantee a minimum of 20% dodge odds. He carries a Vigorous Attack, which is an automatic skill. We'll get to those in a bit of a second. So, occasionally, this will trigger at the start of his turn, which guarantees his attack. A guaranteed attack, by the mechanics of this game, will also always carry the debuff of a weapon with him. So, like, by default, this Cutlass has a chance to inflict Fall Strike, but he's going to always inflict Fall Strike while using this. So essentially, he picks his target, he gets his Fall Strike on there, he gets his dodge on there, he's already up to 40% dodge odds versus basically anything with a melee attack. Now, we take a look at something else, which will actually go into a fight for this next bit here, because I want to show off a few other mechanics here as well. Because the simulation goes even deeper, and one of those things that I love about this thing is that it brought to bear a lot of things that technically existed in older versions, but they also... Actually, this is even one of the mechanics that ends up getting criticized, but it's also something I love about this version personally. See, there's a lot of simulation elements to the strategy side of this game that are a little bit in the undersold side. They technically mention them in the player manual, but they're also something that most people will not run into because they're used to the standard thing of, like, it's the stats and the position, like the facing and everything else that really matter over everything else. And technically, it does matter. But remember, the thing to remember about this version is that all of these guys are professionals. Like, look down there on the bottom right. See that there's an accuracy bonus applied to a particular tile, and that's basically your character's footing. If they have good footing, they have a good chance to go and land a hit from that particular location. Most of the time, if a character is aiming at another one, their odds to hit are going to be very high. Outside of absolute rookies, most of the time, your characters are going to be accurate. Now, the reason that this matters is because, again, remember, these guys are all professionals. They're all fairly durable against basic attacks, which means that your main strategy comes from exploiting and creating weaknesses. Essentially, that just doing the standard running up and hitting the other guy back and forth isn't really what you're going for here. You're essentially looking to try to isolate, to try to exploit, essentially trying to break the other team in a lot of different ways. But it's all the little subtleties that they added in the system that really add up. Things like adding pincer attacks, which allow characters to team up on somebody else to use those basic attacks. Things like adding this card system, which is kind of fascinating. Like, the reason that he took half the health off that character over there is because he not only took a physical bonus from that card. That's kind of the problem with when I saw a lot of reviews at the time. They're like, oh, you have to use the cards to get ahead. You can use the cards to get ahead. What actually gave him that bonus there is his element. See, I think if there is a criticism to my mind as far as the system goes that I would like to throw out, it's that they didn't put the elemental bars up by default, because that information is absolutely mandatory in my opinion. Because essentially what we see right here is, like, where this guy is going to go hit this guy over here, he's got that bonus applied to him, and he's going to go and take off a decent chunk of his health. By default, you can see attacks don't necessarily hurt particularly hard, but But if you end up exploiting elemental weaknesses, debuff weaknesses, or hurting the other guy in some particular way, like let's say you apply something like fear and you go and you combine in something like breach, that thing is just getting absolutely devastated. So this system is really fun in a sort of like speed chessy kind of way. It's one of the reasons that I really adore the system in general, because it's a absolute ton of fun. So let me go ahead and cover these cards next, because what these cards did is oftentimes hard to appreciate if you haven't seen the alternative. So essentially what these cards are doing is that they're essentially serving as an analog for the stuff that used to be the passives before. See, in that PSP version, actually, let's take one step further back. Let's say back in the SNES version. If you had a character that wanted to be a hybrid of any description, essentially using different damage types, weapon types, what have you, the thing that you would have to bear in mind is that they would just need to have particular stats to make that weapon go up. That is very dry and basic, okay? So instead, let's go ahead and say, well, what if instead we happen to look at a situation where, you wanted them to get individually better at particular things, and that's where we saw the sort of skill system coming up back from that other version from PSP. In theory, it was amazing, because it would be something like, okay, you're fighting a particular racial type, so you put on that racial skill, you go and, you're personally a human, so you put on anatomy, you understand your own anatomy better, so you get a defensive bonus. You get a defensive bonus for having skill in that particular weapon, so you can resist that weapon type. You can equip a second weapon type to have your own finisher skills unlocked for it. In theory, the system was amazing, and again, if you want to see that system actually live up to its potential, that's where that One Vision overhaul comes in. The problem was that it was very, very clumsy. Most of those passives just counteracted each other, and in a lot of cases, you would just wind up with the same kind of just beating each other back and forth, that type of thing, where everybody's holding their lines for like an hour, and then eventually one side breaks, and it's fun in its own way. The problem is that its systems then further collapsed in on themselves courtesy of ranged attacks, which scaled a lot more than everything else, and more or less just turned into a, like SEAL Team 6 going to go friggin' attack some medieval castle or something. Yeah, they're probably gonna have a pretty easy time shooting something from a million miles away and one-shotting it, versus trying to get close. It was a ever-widening gap between your standard units that are fun to use and your range units. They always ended up getting the shots off first. They got their one-shots very quickly. Meant that everybody else couldn't get close, that they couldn't get their skills up, they couldn't get their training done. They got worse and worse and worse over time. Your ranged units got better and better and better. And even if you tried to address this, oftentimes it would just end up awkward. So you were kind of dancing around the systems in it. So what we see here as an example is essentially a system in which there's a lot of sort of elegant kind of unspoken things that are going on. Let's say in this case, she's a berserker here. She's primarily relying on her basic physical attack, okay? She has a skill that's activated. Implications of this are manyfold. So in this one, activated skills, unlike previous ones, can be stacked. So sometimes you want to save skills in order to combine them with something else, which is exactly what happened here. That she activated her Berserk on account of having a auto skill card that made it more likely to happen. And so she's got both Sanguine Assault, which is going to increase her strength by 50%, as well as Berserk, which allows her to get a small damage bonus of about, I think it was 30%, as well as hitting in a circle around her. So Berserk basically means that she gets to ignore elemental weaknesses in a sense, as well as hitting in a circle around her. As a matter of technicality, we can argue semantics all day of it's technically different between element and physical attack. Shush, it's 30%. Moving on. Anyway, but what this means is, yes, she can take this big ol' sweep to potentially take out 2 units, circle like this, and also she's going to get herself spiked back, but we'll get to that particular mechanic in a bit of a moment. But the point is, combining skills is new in this version. You have a lot of little implications that are added in all of these situations. Like, for example, I equip her with a Poison Claw so that she can poison. But if, let's say, I gave her a one-handed axe and a shield, she still would be able to do a similar type of attack, and she actually can do this later with a Poison Dagger. But the implications of that situation extend to where that particular attack can be saved for later, essentially banking up these combined skills by using a Shield Bash instead of your regular weapon attack. So that gets me to the sort of next mechanical little, well, that's interesting kind of situation when it comes to the combinations. So weapons are actually tied with skills in this one. So like counter, parry, and deflect are 3 skills that you used to have to upgrade and level up and whatever else in previous versions. As I said before, this was unbelievably tedious, and there were some cases in which you'd equip a counter weapon, other cases that you wouldn't. Most of the time, you want counterattack on there, but again, the situations could potentially vary. So we're just going to attempt to recruit this guy before he dies. We'll see if that works. Did not work. Well, you know what? We gave it a shot. But the interesting thing is that in this version, let's say instead of using up one of your skill slots to be able to go use something like parry or deflect, you don't have to pick parry or deflect anymore. You essentially have that tied to a one-handed weapon. So like as soon as there's a one-handed weapon in play, they're going to parry in all cases. And so that is pretty darn neat. Essentially, it means that characters are able to parry a lot earlier in the game, and additionally, a lot of characters that previously couldn't parry or couldn't deflect now can. Most notably, stuff like wizards, which previously could equip daggers, but didn't really have a whole lot of reason to do so. So it's pretty neat that essentially options are expanded in terms of defensive skills. When it came to counterattacks, those also are going to be available on heavier weapons. And you might be thinking, okay, wait a minute, but I want to be able to both counter and parry at the same time. Does that mean my options were removed? And no, this is kind of one of those classic arguments from back in the day, because they actually added them to different types of skills in order to be able to do that exact thing. As an example, one of my favorite builds in the later game is actually a variation of this one in which I replaced this shield with a elemental shortbow, which gives a counterattack option, which means that they both parry and counter at the same time, which means that he can effectively get even more of a discount on melee attacks, because this vigorous attack here guarantees it, but additionally, stuff like a pincer attack does not have a cost associated with it. Meaning he's not paying the cost for swinging his weapon, he's using this tile as his action, meaning there is no recovery time associated with it. He can attack for free. If he's got a counterattack from that bow, now he can put his blindness debuff on people for free because he's getting a free counterattack. Again, he's using the counterattack, he's not using the main weapon as his attack option, therefore the price is free. Finding these little discounts, finding these little like workarounds to the system, that's the beauty and elegance of this whole thing. Because everything can potentially tie into another mechanic down the road. Another little thing to potentially exploit, another thing to play around. Whether it's using particular elements to get around the fact that you have a bad matchup. Whether it's using things like guaranteed attacks to get around certain types of defenses. Like as an example, when it comes to things like ranged weapons. Their default formula, I mentioned earlier that weapons have different types of formulas for fighting things. In this case, the default formula for ranged attacks is very chaotic. It's very, very resisted by armor, but additionally, it has potentially great rewards if you hit somebody on a breach or a good elemental matchup or stuff like that. Like if she goes and targets this one, her armor would still resist it despite the elemental matchup, put a breach and fear on that unit, and this damage goes up to like 350. It's one of these cases where they're essentially able to trickle up their damage really well. Sometimes I might use this knight with a crossbow in an attempt to try and silence something, but that only has a chance to happen. But let's say I have something like a archer who has an eagle eye buff. That is going to give a guaranteed ranged attack to everybody nearby, meaning that now there's a guaranteed chance to shut down this wizard with his crossbow. So that kind of stuff is fascinating, because it means through a combination of positioning your units nearby each other to accept each other's buffs and support abilities and things like that, through just finding these clever ways to attack for free or attack multiple times or whatever else, you can find all kinds of interesting matchups that give a very fluid feel to your party. So while initially that 4-slot system may seem kind of limiting, it's one that really just feels freeing as you're learning more about it. It feels like, wow, I had this idea in mind. I can just quickly slap this unit together. I just put a couple of skills in this new order. Holy crap, this is something completely different. Things like using these guarantees and new ways to use your speed and stuff like that, it matters quite a bit. Like, let's say you're tired of your basic wizards throwing fireballs. That's, it's damage, sure, but that's dull as hell. So, what if instead you wanted to have a wizard that was just dedicated to turbo charming people? Well, you can absolutely do that. You have somebody that, let's say, does charm everybody nearby them, but instead, you give them concentration. That's going to give them, once again, guaranteed odds. We talked about buffs and debuffs earlier. So this means that their odds can never drop below 30% in order to inflict a debuff. You equip something like Conserve RT, which means that they cast speed-wise for free. They never pay a cost for casting their spells, and they sit in place. Every tile that you move is going to add to your recovery time. So you learn to take these quick actions. You put on skills that reduce the amount of time it takes you to do stuff. You're suddenly creating a turbo caster out of what was just a basic wizard before. Something like Recruit, where you have up to 40% odds to just convince a unit to defect to your side, seems kind of whatever at first, but then you realize, hey, every time that you recruit somebody, they hand over all of their equipment. Then you start realizing, wait a minute, I don't necessarily need to use Recruit simply for the purpose of recruiting. That guy is facing the wrong way. He doesn't have a counterattack. I can't make him turn. But if I talk to him, with my 0% chance to recruit him, he turns my direction, I take a swing, he's maybe he parries it or whatever, my buddy's gonna attack him from behind with a pincer, with a spear. Like, that's the kinds of cool thinking through stuff, if you're paying attention, that I adore about this game, man. So yeah, those kinds of systems, everything is a little deeper the more that you learn about it. I mean, there are a lot of us that have been playing the PSP version, that have played that one for over a decade when this one ended up coming out. And still, it was actually, come to think of it, was it technically over a decade when this one came out? I'm not sure. It doesn't matter. Besides the point. But the point is, we had stuff like ninjas, as an example, who have an ability that allows them to play dead, due to a simple change in the UI that they made for this one, where it shows them as undead instead of dead. It finally allowed for picking up the fact that this is a unit that allows them to, a move that allows them to hide, instead of just self-destruct. There was more to this thing the entire time, but this version ended up tweaking these little things to make these original ideas come to life. Again, everything is just... It is directly an improvement of that PSP version in ways that are oftentimes hard to understand if you never understood the original. If you didn't understand what the problems were in the original idea there. And so the way that all of these same ideas are brought forward, that essentially, these ideas are presented in a new way, this means that you can play the game a lot more freely. There's a lot less mental roadblocks in the way compared with any other version of this thing. And like, look, I adore the One Vision overhaul to pieces. I've covered it extensively. But it's part of the reason that when I sit down and play Reborn, it's just a mental happy place, okay? It's just something that I can endlessly look at these units, find new ways to play around with them. It seems limiting until we realize how liberating it is. Previously, things like Wade and Jump and Swiftfoot, these all used to be passives you'd have to go and unlock and go put on somebody. No, they're upgrades in their equipment. Their equipment no longer has a chance to fail anymore. The crafting system was entirely redone. And this is before even getting to the unbelievably good voice work that they did for this one. I haven't even covered that yet.
I'll bet you're wondering, how can he drink in front of them starving kids? What I want to know is, would drinking elsewhere change anything? It won't fill their bellies, that's for sure.
True.
This is the bottom of the cask, boy. Lees and dregs. Got our share of refugees, too, thanks to you and your kind.
You're suggesting I drove those children here?
Refugees don't grow on trees. But don't you worry none. Just keep on with your resisting, and we'll find a way to feed them, or not.
I'm not averting my eyes from the truth. I know what I've done, and why.
Why have we been fighting all these long months? For the Wallister? Was it to claim this island as our own? From some base greed? No! I say no! If we were driven by avarice, the Galgastani would have little cause to follow us, or indeed to do anything but resist us. For what have we bled, I ask you? Who are our enemies? Hierophant Balbatos of Galgastan, yes. And Branton Morn of the Bakram and the Dark Knights. It is these men who have forced our people to sacrifice so much, who have tortured and trampled the people under well-shod heels. While they remain standing, true peace will find no purchase on these isles.
Like, as far as the story is concerned, the emotion that goes behind a lot of the scenes in this game, I say a lot of, I mean, there's like maybe 2 characters that don't have as much emotion as everybody else, and everybody else just like absolutely gave it their all. When they were doing interviews before this one released, they were even talking about how they specifically had people scream at each other so that their voices were hoarse enough to sell the part. Okay. So yeah, it's a fun system for sure. It's just a fun little thing to note about here. And again, it's worth noting that everything has its place. That oftentimes a lot of the criticisms that come to this game come from a misunderstanding of just how much it loves to go against the grain. So for example, things like, oh my god, it's so dumb that somebody like a melee class can use a cudgel because they don't do basic damage. I hit something and it did 1, and this game is basically broken, man. I just can't believe that they didn't design it right. They can't keep getting away with this. And it's like, okay, hold up. They got the stick. Gives them range +2, okay? We talked about the speed thing earlier. So they don't take basic attacks. They sit put. They block a place. They got Rampart Aura. That blocks the area around them. They sit in place on a staircase or something. They got Lament of the Dead. That's going to reduce their stats, right? It's going to reduce stats of everything around them in a circle. They got Concentration, guaranteed debuff odds on spells. Amazing. Okay, good. They got a Cudgel skill. Hold up. They're not doing a whole lot of damage. Okay, fantastic, though. You look at something like the Cudgel's Finisher list. Later on, they got one that is a multi-hit move. The class itself, pretty solid on physical stats, pretty decently bulky. They've got armor, which means that they're not going to be too threatened by ranged attacks unless something goes wrong. So you have somebody that is a good line holder, a great shutdown unit, courtesy of Sleep and Paralytic Wave having these guaranteed odds. But additionally, they actually are able to extend their spell range courtesy of having this stick. And there's a lot of very tough units that happen to be a dark element, which the Cudgel category in general is entirely all divine abilities. So in some cases, they're able to just simply run up and one-tap several bosses by using a build like this, but in the meantime, they are a very good suppression unit. Actually, one more thing that I didn't even get into here is when it comes to combination spells. So there's actually a lot of spells that were completely reworked from earlier versions, and this is partially why I love the 4-slot system, because instead of seeing like, okay, that character is running 2 different elements, and they got like 30 different spells that are slightly different variations of each other, about 60% of that is the same basic damage abilities tiered up based off of how much MP they're using. They've got the same debuffs between Dark and Earth for the most part, but they're just going to occasionally use one or the other. Anyway, so it's just like, it's a whole thing where it's like, okay, great. They cast Paralytic Wave 15 turns in a row with a 2% chance to hit. Interestingly enough, the little side note on this. We'll get to the... Okay, there's 3 things that are noted as bugs. I'm going to put it closer to 1.5, but you'll see why in a moment. But we'll get to that after this. But yeah, stuff like Instill Shadow, the shield spells, the instill spells, these were actually combined into one and made automatic, because these were 2 buffs that were useful, but outside of challenge runs, people would just basically not use these. So like, so it's a case where you have the old attenuate abilities, which would then tag off of a shield ability, which is a oddly specific combination that was because they were trying to bring in mechanics from Vagrant Story, FFT's kind of sort of sequel. But the thing is, in that context, it worked, because it's like, oh, hey, there's me, one guy, there's a boss, one guy, he's using that one element, and so you could be like, hey, look, I put up my elemental shield, this is kind of cool. In this case, you've got, potentially up to a couple dozen units on each side, and it's like, okay, so I put up my fire shield, I'm just never getting hit by fire now, so what was the point in investing in resisting it? And that was actually the case with a lot of abilities, where like even if you learned to resist a debuff, its purpose was more so to make sure that you didn't get targeted with that debuff rather than being immune to it, which was a whole other system. And so they totally like reworked that from the ground up here. So yeah, you have shields and instills essentially being a damage boost and a damage resistance. They are essentially an automatic thing. Your character just does it every now and then. So they apply a buff to their weapon, which allows them, depending on the elemental relationship between units, to potentially get anywhere between like a 15 to I think it's like 35% bonus, depending on, again, the relationship, you know, how much they match the element, how much their opponent is weak to that element. And additionally, it's going to be a shield, and however this shield specifically covers, it either makes you way more resistant to the thing you're already resistant to, or if you are weak to that particular element, like you'll notice I have Instill Shadow on a light unit here, it makes her resistant to dark. So effectively this is covering her weakness. So where an elemental unit, let's say this unit were to be hit by a dark attack, they would be taking that 30% bonus. Shield is here to prevent that. So you have these cases where you have these auto shields that certain characters are able to employ, which gives them kind of oddly specific tankiness under two different scenarios, but everything serves another role. So again, design elegance, absolutely adore that. I also didn't cover this earlier, but when it comes to a unit getting downed, one of the other quality of life features that they improved in this one is going to be when it comes to revives. So while your characters do completely die if they bleed out, they do get an instant turn if a revival item is used on them. The amount that you can carry is limited, but this does again lead to another form of strategy in the form of just thinking how to exploit the systems that are on hand. Like you're thinking, okay, I don't like my frontliners, they can never get to where somebody got downed to bring them back in time. You know, it might be difficult to go pull somebody back, so you do something like the Rescue Griffin over here. Griffins, zoomy as fuck, but when it comes to direct damage, they're going to have an easier time pecking away at wizards and clerics than they are going after a lot of the heavier, tankier guys, because again, they're, you know, using their natural animal hurdies until against a tin can, it's going to be a bit resistant to that. And so what we see here is a guy that is going to have a chance to increase their movement range. They're going to have a chance to shake off any kind of movement resisting debuffs. So for example, stuff like Leaden is something that archers are able to put on somebody that prevents them from moving up and down in elevation. And so they're able to shake this off. They're able to dash ahead. They're able to attack in a way that heals their health, but also, importantly, they're able to use this very extensive range to go bring stuff like Blessing Stones to somebody far away, essentially allowing them to serve as a sort of flying ambulance rather than a direct attack unit. And that, again, is the kind of logistical thinking I adore about this game, because it's just... you're constantly paying attention to speed, distance, weight, all that sort of thing. It's not to such a degree that you'll be completely screwed if you don't, but if you do pay attention to all these little things of how stuff works, it's such a rewarding experience. You know, like as soon as you pick up on that speed, great, that's awesome. Then you notice something like an octopus, like okay, you know, notice that if I give them some charms to improve their mind, they don't get equipment, they don't get too many scaling abilities, but hold on, all those stat items that don't really benefit my other human units that much, these beast units benefit from a bunch. Hold on, we gave all of our mind items over to this octopus. Holy crap, we now have a basically guaranteed poison nuke. That is very useful. Or Aqua Bubble. You can't get over there to go breach a unit to improve their defenses. So let's say you make a tag team between an octopus and an archer. Archers benefit a ton from the breach debuff. And so what this guy does is he slinks forward, picks up an auto card to make sure that their Aqua Veil covers them in water so they're able to use their water abilities. Give them a few mind charms, maybe a mind ring or something like that. Then they have this Aqua Bubble, they snipe a guy, then the archer goes and takes their, you know, double critical shot, and suddenly that guy went from being basically untouchable to being just a friggin' mound on the ground. So these kinds of tag team combinations are a thing of beauty. I really love it for that. You know, comparing it with something like the Tamer, which technically can throw an item that does the same thing without rolling for a chance, he can't necessarily do it at the same range, and also potentially has to sacrifice an item to do that, whereas an octopus can do that over and over. Like, there's a lot of things like this, okay? I could go on about this for days. Hell, half the frickin' channel, most of the channel, is just going on about stuff like this, because this game is so good with these kinds of combinations. So with that all being said, let's go ahead and cover just a few more things that I just wanted to cover here. So, bugs, right? So I mentioned that there were three things that were considered bugs, but I personally consider them to be closer to 1.5 things. So, first thing is debuffs. So enemy casters do not cast debuff spells. Why is it bugged? It's actually specifically programmed that is a specific thing that they cannot do. it might seem kind of random. Oh my god, my strategy, they were supposed to cast debuffs on me, and you actually still get hit by debuffs all the time. The thing is, the PSP version would have fights that would go on for hours, because the AI would constantly think, huh, that would be useful right now, some stun. And so they will spam the same debuff ability, the same spells, over and over, to their detriment and your own. Nobody's getting anything out of this situation. They're barely landing any of their debuffs because, you know, trying to convince an AI when and how they should be using certain spells, especially with how random the spawns were in that version, it was just an exercise in futility, because we're talking about a case where they've got, like, I think the total list was like 30, 40 something debuffs of all kinds of different variations of each other, and it's just like, the AI would totally not understand what the hell to do in that situation, so it would just pick something and spam it and spam it and spam it. The fan overhaul I was talking about combined a lot of these abilities just to A, cut down on how egregiously long the list used to be, and B, make them do something useful. Getting somebody both breached and poisoned, that is a great way to say, hey, you are magically, like, fucked over, get out of the fight. Whereas before it's like, oh, they cast False Strike, the thing that makes your melee accuracy go down, on my archer, because they cannot tell the difference between melee and ranged, because it's just another unit, because if they gave them that distinction, they would not understand what's going on. Oh no, the AI is panicking because I silenced their berserker, which cannot cast things. Like, there were a lot of little things like that. It took a ton of time, it slowed down the game to an immense degree, but you'll notice that the AI does actually still carry these abilities, because one of the cool things that you could do is, let's say, have a sneaky guy go around the back of the party, they punch a wizard, convince them to switch sides, and hey, guess what? Now they're mind-controlling stuff after getting convinced to switch sides. That's a cool trader moment right there, okay? Every unit based off of their loyalty, like, when you look at somebody's loyalty, step back to look at mechanics real quick. Recruit stuff. When you hit select, or your equivalent of select, the double squares button in the case of the Steam Deck here, what you actually do is you go over the unit's name and it will say their loyalty to their commander. So in this case, I've had this fairy for a while, had a lot of wins with them. They've learned a lot of weapon skills. You actually make your loyalty go up by training weapon skills and just kind of treating them well in general. Just so you know, desertion mechanics technically exist. There's only a couple of times when it realistically will ever come up. Don't worry about it. Well, I see a lot of new folks stress about this. Don't worry about it. Anyway, so yeah, if they have lower loyalty, your odds of recruiting them are higher, but your odds go down every time that you ask them to switch sides. The reason that this is important, though, is, yeah, you can just kind of sneak somebody behind. Notably, somebody like the Valkyrie can, let's say, have Meditate go off in their first round, run up, hit somebody, essentially have a chance to recruit them right then and there. Okay, so potentially that is a very useful tool. So yeah, I personally love the recruit skills. Not only does it give you all of their equipment, it turns them into your unit temporarily for that fight, and permanently if you choose to keep them, and you can rename them something stupid, you know, like the God Fairy over here. So yeah, that's always fun. But yeah, you have specific skills for recruiting specific things, and Mr. Canopus, your kind of god unit at the start of the game, is actually the guy that ends up going and recruiting fairies for you. But yeah, so as far as all that is concerned, that is, in my eyes, a quality of life feature, not a bug. Because, yeah, just I'm sure anyone that's played the PSP version can back me up on this one, because, yeah, that shit was annoying. Yeah, definitely fixed in one vision, but that is a totally different experience. Both are amazing in my eyes. And, oh, actually, one more thing I forgot to mention. Actually, let's go over to this guy to take a look at this. When we're talking about how do we know that, one vision was referenced in this thing, two items in particular. They added a holy water item, which was, it should have been done anyway. They got rid of using, they took out a mechanic in which you could use all spell books by anybody. The problem was that it didn't actually use their skills when they were doing that, except it kind of situationally did. Anyways, sorry, it's a long story short, it just made it to where you realistically were better off using the pile of spell books rather than you were actually teaching somebody a spell. So it's like, why would you bother using an exorcist when you could just go use Grimoire Exorcism with anybody? That's spell slots and skill slots and whatever else you just don't need to be investing in. Anyways, Point is, in this version, yeah, you have a holy water item that you can use to exercise undead, but additionally, they recolored exactly one item, and that's the Dynast King's Mead, just to exactly the same palette that the One Vision Overhaul uses. I've heard from folks over on the Square side of things that they do have fans of the mod over there as well. So, it's great to see that little nod to the fan overhaul as well. Because yeah, it is an incredible experience all its own. Anyways, so with that all said, let's go back to the whole bug discussion thing. So the next one that comes up, and this is one that personally frustrates me to a great deal, because the folks that have been screaming at the top of their lungs over this thing have made basically a mountain out of a molehill here. It's kind of a classic of the whole thing. It's the sort of thing that would come up as a random piece of like 2-second trivia on like a Pokemon video or something. It's okay. Here's how the bug works. All right. Technically speaking, when you are attacking somebody, everything works just fine. It's great. When an enemy is attacking you, it is going to use the player's primary weapon hand for bonus damage resistance. Now, what is bonus damage resistance? Well, it is this number that appears at the top of your gear, right? It's essentially a little resistance amount. And when I mean little resistance amount, I mean like look at averages here. Okay, you combine them between the entire suit. It's basically the same number, more or less, like within 1%. Okay, this is a game in which 1% does not matter. You can argue about it technically mattering, and I will wait for the evidence where that 1% surely mattered. It's almost never a situation where somebody's going to survive on 1 health, right? So this is basically a thing that says, hey, if you really want to metagame mega hard, you can pick a specific, you can go pick a weapon type that matches the physical type of your armor when you go and combine it all, and you'll have like 1% extra defense in some situations. Now, I should point out, it's not 1% extra defense in all situations. See, bonus damage is not regular damage. It is basically the damage that happens after all the other damage. It's a little bit of extra damage that comes from that weapon. Like, okay, this one had like 11 bonus damage at the very end. So after attack power, after that attack power has gone against defense, it's gone against resistances, it's gone between element types, it's gone between everything else, then it's like, hold on, whatever amount is left at the end of the day, we will add 11% physical if it happens to apply. And then the armor says, no, I'm going to eat about half of that. So in reality, it's like 5 or 6% extra damage. All said and done. After everything else is done, it's like the lowest common denominator as far as the damage of everything else goes. This is something that is so obscure and minor that even on challenge runs, it is completely useless information. I have seen people declare the game unplayable over this. This is something that even when you know it's there, you know how to exploit it, it's hard to even justify finding a reason to do so, because you're always going to, like, if you try to exploit this as a mechanic, you see that defense number down there? Yeah, if you try to stack specifically just for bonus damage, your actual defense goes down, meaning that, yes, technically you take more bonus damage now, but you take more overall damage too. So you're essentially losing even trying to metagame with this. So there's no useful use case for this information. Okay, correction. There's one useful use case for this information. If at the end of the game, once you're like over 100 hours in, you're in the post-game dungeon, right? You specifically happen to get let's say a ring, right? And this ring lets your octopus walk on lava, right? But if its crushing bonus is slightly higher than any of the other bonuses, then it's better to put this on your octopus as opposed to anybody else. This is after you've gotten several copies of that same ring and then combine them together to the point that that bonus actually kind of exists. And then you probably still will only see that bonus if they're being attacked specifically with a Dragoon using the specific skill that specifically attacks them and also is only doing so in melee, and also got to combine both of their skills together. And also they had a physical card bonus, which allowed that bonus to show up even more, which means that they're actually a threat now. And then, why didn't you just give them a better ring at that point? Why do we care about this? This is so dumb. It's so oddly specific. All right, anyways, so yeah, on a personal level, that one kind of pisses me off because it's just the most nothing burger nonsense. At most, if you went out of your way to exploit it in any, like, even in the Ultra Post game where you have relics that you can specifically have spawn with just one defense type over another. It's never worth sacrificing raw defense for this bonus of, like, a subtype of damage. It's just not worth it. It's just, like, it's trivia knowledge. And it's constantly brought up in my comments, like, oh my god, how can they keep getting away with this? Like, dude, it's nothing! This does not matter! Anyway, so moving on to the one that I would put in the one category for this one, okay? So, alright, going back to it. You'll notice a lot of my Valkyries over here are running spears. Valkyries / Rune Fencers. They're in the same class, it's just depending on gender, whatever. Anyway, so, here's the thing. You see this nifty little 2 mind bonus over here? If I took that spear off, it would affect their damage by 2? They're not really getting that 2 damage! Oh my god, it's unplayable! Okay, so, sorry, I'm being dramatic, kind of being an asshole here. I apologize. Like, again, you should see some of the vitriol that comes from some of these comments here. I've seen people leave, like, 3-page long comments on this crap. Leave negative reviews on Steam. It's like, anyway, okay, so, context. Magic does not scale very much in this one, right? Now, it's definitely a case of every little bit you can get whatever kind of situation. I am going to switch to another save file here real quick, so that I can go ahead and show you something. Okay. So I'm gonna save over this guy real quick. Is this the right one? I will assume it's yes and move on. Anyway, so we'll go ahead and pull up one of my other save files here. So, like I said before, I don't think you could even intentionally spoil this game, so bear with me here. But okay, let's take a look here, because we'll show one of the more dramatic examples of what this does. So, you technically do not get your magic bonus on certain weapon types under 2 circumstances. A, if it's a 2-handed weapon. So this means that 2-handed stabs, which are like a subtype of a subtype that you basically wouldn't really use very often, technically do not get their damage bonus. Now, I specifically stress this because it's just when they're attacking. So I believe they've confirmed at this point, I might be brain farting on this one, but I believe they've confirmed at this point that Mind, for the purposes of your accuracy on debuffs, is still doing what it's supposed to be doing, because it's taking the character stats as a whole. When it's attacking, and I believe this is probably a function of the fact that they combined spells together with melee attacks on this one, so like your melee attack weapon skill is actually trained up by your spells, which is a very useful quality of life feature. It basically means that you can, for example, switch into a physical attack with your magic caster. If, let's say, they pick up a physical and a critical card, that allows them to switch into something that is theoretically very effective under some circumstances. Just basically allows them to do that sort of hybrid thing on the fly, which is really, really cool. But essentially what happens here is that when they're casting that spell, it is essentially not applying their weapons a magic attack bonus. In this case, this would be intelligence, providing roughly like 4-ish damage off of intelligence here. Mind providing roughly 14-ish damage off its thing here. For context, again, their base value going into this thing is like 530, or 538 here. Okay, now, again, these are rough numbers. You could argue in a damage calculator all day. We're talking, like, what exactly is 16 to 540 here? It's nothing. It's beyond peanuts, right? But it's a situation where it's technically not getting that additional bonus, and this is assuming it's using the entire staff, okay? So yeah, for accuracy, it's fine. For damage, it's not getting that damage bonus. Now, the only part that this actually matters is in another oddly specific situation, which I actually did mention the other thing that makes it trigger. You have a weapon, one-handed weapon in your main hand, but for some reason you chose to leave your other hand empty. There's never a reason to do this, but technically it's there. You'll notice the AI does that. The AI does that a lot, and it basically makes them very slightly faster. However, the AI units are specifically left in a situation where they are made to not take this particular casting bonus. The reason that this matters is right here. So an elemental bonus applied to a weapon, if it is a spell that is super effective versus the other guy, use the weapons element bonus in addition to whatever else is going on. But remember, again, magic, not scaling very high. It is very stable, good at getting past defenses. Does not scale very much. Okay? So, getting an extra 15% using the spear would be useful. Not really the end of the world. There's barely any melee weapons that are designed for this purpose, and even fewer units that specifically have any reason to do anything like that. Because the only time that they would have access to spells at all is in cases like, let's say, Lesker's Beloved over here, which gives you 3 casts, a Spark Sphere. Oh hey, that's a one-handed weapon that's getting its full bonus. Okay, so what about the other weapon types? Well, we look at axes. Okay, can't really use those. Got the rune axe. Okay, once again, it's one-handed. You've got Drain Mind, which is not really going to care for damage. This is basically 10 MP drained almost every time anyway. You got the Brius with its ability to cast. Oh, hey, look, it's one-handed again. Like, you got the Terrax, which I don't think this one even, it doesn't even have mental stats anyway. So, like, it's a case where, in theory, this should be a deal for some weapons in the mega late game. We're talking like 400 plus hours into the game. For further context as to why this still doesn't matter, the Grand Grimoire, okay? This thing has changed in a bunch of weirdly specific ways, and in many ways actually applies. I did a video on like a sort of fan theory about this particular book a little while ago. Just look up the Roderick time loop theory. But in this case, it's basically giving up something to the extent of about 60 damage at a time where spells could be doing over 1,000. Theoretically, it's giving up that 22 bonus, but again, this only would apply in situations where the spell itself is already super effective, at which point, by this point in the game, that's probably one-shotting the thing anyway, okay? So by that point, you're doing just egregious numbers. So this bonus only applies in cases where they've already broken through defenses anyway, and in that situation, that unit's probably already dead anyway. So it's like, we're arguing about kind of splash damage, and okay. Sorry, one additional thing. Technically, there's 2 staves that are affected by this too, which is going to be the Wiseman and the Sage Staff over here, and even in these situations, these are basically trophy weapons. Something like the Sagara, a dramatically better weapon that is in one hand, is in a lot of cases going to be a lot easier to get a hold of than these 2 staves. You might get them along the way, but by the time you're trying to grind them up to max them out, this thing is already easier to get a hold of. It's already better in every single conceivable way, from bonus to stat bonus to weight to everything. Like, it even gives you a skill bonus, which allows you to use grenades better. It's just like, in every conceivable way, this thing blows it out of the water. This thing you get before these 2. It does the same thing in almost every regard. Okay? So the point that I'm trying to make here is, while technically the bug does exist, it's a case where the only times it would ever even theoretically appear, it's just a complete, it's so unspeakably niche that it just does not functionally matter. Anyways, sorry, personally frustrates me to see that kind of stuff, but that's that's life sometimes. So with that being said, that is most of the stuff that I wanted to cover here on this one. This is, again, this is one of my favorite things that has ever been released on anything. It is a game I absolutely adore. This is everything from its adaptive narrative to the way the combat mechanics work to the setting. I haven't even gotten into the mood lighting, dude. Like, going back into like any random fight here. One thing that I didn't even mention is when it comes to these backgrounds. So every one of these different fights here, they're a situation in which the local area in this version has been lovingly remade using the in-game assets to essentially give you a larger picture of the area off in the background here. There's really no reason for them to have gone the extra mile for that, but I really appreciate that. You got little quality of life features like being able to adjust the sounds of individual things, from sound effects to voices to things like the weather, and I love that because there's a lot of times when I want to specifically just hear, the rain sounds or something like that, and being able to turn off the music and just play with that sort of ambient sound, almost like Dark Souls-esque type of stuff going on, is great. They have specific options for if you're, let's say, you have your party set up in such a way that they're just complete powerhouses that they're able to deal with grind maps with no assistance from you, you can set your party up in that particular way and then just kind of set them to AI, leave it in the background. That particular mechanic also has the option to switch off certain sounds only in that situation. You've got... for the grind-heavy folks, you have the option to go and stack grind the hell out of people in the late game if you really want to, though it's worth noting that this is completely unnecessary. That scaling thing that I mentioned earlier means that even base stat units are actually still a massive threat throughout the entire game. I've done a lot of videos, essentially not only stuff like the speed run, being perpetually underleveled and still fighting through everything just fine, but even specifically going through stuff like the post-game where everything is already overleveled, still getting through all of that stuff relatively smoothly. It's a system that is designed to use those particular mechanics very, very well. But additionally, for those that want to completely skip stuff, like I mentioned earlier, where you have the option to stack grind if that's your thing, but if you're somebody that prefers to just go for those quick little, kind of neat tricks and whatever else, like I personally do, you've got cases where, like, you got the Ogre Blade, which had its mechanics completely reworked in this version. Essentially being a late-game sword that you can use as a one-time consumable to body swap to units. So let's say you have a unit that has really good intelligence but terrible physical stats. You go and you body swap them into something like a hoplite lizard, giving them near physical immortality, and then actually no, you go and convert them to a patriarch. They've got a bunch of physical shield options that automatically refresh, and then from there you go and give them a bunch of really good spells and such, but now you've potentially given them a second level up because you've leveled them up as a completely different unit, but they kept their mental stats from the mind transfer. So they keep their mind, and then they effectively just double their mind's power by the time they get to the second one. This also allows you to create your own custom classes in the late game, doing things like transferring all of your skills from one guy over to another one. Weapon restrictions remain the same, but they can do things like, hey, you want Lament of the Dead on a ferry? Fuck it, do it. You want to have your angel songs on a Swordmaster? Why not? You want to, let's say, give your knights physical near immortality to let's say a Pumpkinhead or something? Sure, why not? You got a Pumpkinhead with 90% damage resistance. You can now give him some grenades and run up and rocket punch stuff. Like, these little creative moments where you throw away the traditional stuff in favor of lateral thinking is just sublime, right? So, anyways, I think this game is absolutely incredible. I love it to pieces. It's an absolute masterpiece, just 10 out of 10 in my book. Are there some things that I can see people having an issue with as far as individual mechanical preferences? Yeah, absolutely. But as far as I'm concerned, the vision that they were going for, making you go into the story and experience this adaptive narrative, keeping everything locked down to where if you're playing well, you can feel insanely powerful, but if you're playing, just expecting the stats to carry you, you're gonna have a bad time. That idea that it's a focus of strategy, of paying attention, of thinking through all of it. It's such a just delicious puzzle to chew on. Okay, so yeah, that's the kind of stuff I absolutely love about this thing. As far as stuff that I wish that they would have done a bit better, I wish that they would have given more, a bit more information when it comes to the player manual. Because a lot of what I talked about today, specific percentage amounts and whatever else, I know why they didn't include it. Because it oftentimes would distract from everything else. People love to metagame, so this game does hide a lot of things to make sure that you don't. But it would have been kind of neat to see something like that taking place. Just a bit more information, something like a XCOM-esque breakdown of different things, like, for example, positioning. I started talking about the weather, footing, and stuff like that earlier. You can actually use a lot of these systems to your advantage, especially if you're doing something like a solo run. If you stand in water, accuracy is lower. So if you, for example, position yourself in such a way that your enemy is standing on water, it's raining, you've got dodge, they've got fall strike, their odds to hit you plummet like a rock. Because rain affects accuracy, and especially affects accuracy for ranged units. Giving yourself dodge is locked in. Giving the other guy a blindness of various different kinds is also locked in. You have items that are unable to miss, which potentially allows you to exploit things in that particular. It's just there's all these little simulation mechanics everywhere, and if you're paying attention, it is a delight. Okay, so anyways, this has gone on egregiously long. So yeah. y'all have yourselves a good one. Let me go ahead and double check my notes here real quick, just on the off chance that maybe I'm forgetting something. Good lord, I hate to edit. Oh yeah, I did forget something. The cards. We started talking about the cards. Okay. So quick little kind of pros cons about the cards thing. Why is it that there's only a certain amount of cards? Because you had a lot of folks when this came out of like, oh, they should have just added more card types. I wish they would have done more with this. It feels kind of basic the way that I'm playing very basically and wondering why the game feels basic. So when it comes to the cards, essentially they come in a few different flavors. You have the cancel cards over there, which purge everybody of their cards. Everyone is allowed to carry a hand of 4 with them at any given time. Destroying a prop or destroying anything else allows you to spawn a card of your own, meaning that there are multiple ways, whether it's searching through boxes or destroying things in the environment, that you are able to spawn your own cards to basically start your fight off without having to worry about where they're going here. In fact, keeping a fire grenade and throwing it on the grass will essentially give you at least one with a chance to spawn additional ones for every grass tile that you burn. This isn't really one of those like meta strategy kind of things, but it's something that you can technically do, and you can also use a wizard with like a firestorm or something like that to do the same thing. But the cool thing about this is that it allows hybrid builds as well as just tricky builds to work in a lot of cool ways. So a lot of automatic skills are egregiously overpowered. In fact, one of the most powerful things in the entire game is Denim with his custom created class that's available in the late game, running around with 4 automatic skills as well as nothing but auto cards, because he can do things like auto-res people for no time or MP cost while also still running in turbo mode, giving somebody an instant turn, full health, full MP, and then being able to do it again a few seconds later. You can abuse the hell out of that particular system because his eventual custom created class is literally a combination of every skill he has ever laid eyes on up to that point, so he can basically make a class out of anything. Almost anything. He refuses to pick up a gun, and I assume that's because of one of the potential endings you can get. Anyways, so yeah, as far as all that goes, this means that that you have the automatic ones that'll boost any auto skill users, as well as any auto spell users. You have the physical ones that give you a direct physical attack bonus, magic ones that give you a direct magic bonus, the critical ones that allow you to have a higher chance to crit. One misconception that did come out over time, crit odds are low, but they're not 0. So if you are, let's say, running a luck ring, you're having a particularly lucky day. Part of the simulation, interesting note, is that your characters do actually have good and bad days. But you essentially can eventually get to the point that you've got 100% crit odds all the time for everything. And so you can do things like, let's say, taking a unit that has Meditate and also understands whips, the extremely high damage Armageddon finisher. You give them a set of equipment that turns them invisible and give them permacrits. Then they're running around, destroying everything with instant permadeath crits. It's great. It's great. Anyway, so the benefit of the system throughout the entire game is that it gives you more flexibility to the existing stuff. Like one of those complaints that happens is that a lot of your late game elemental weapons and stuff like that are in the post game, or in the ultra late game stuff like Palace of the Dead and what have you, and it's because they're kind of unnecessary in this context. A lot of your cooler build options actually come out of your crafted weapons that you can achieve towards chapter 3 or 4. And so, like, let's say with those different cards, right? I mentioned earlier how auto cards could be used for something like Vigorous Attack or Eagle Eye to give somebody a guaranteed deep. When it comes to things like MP cards, it potentially allows to turn somebody into a absolute critical spammer. When it comes to something like not critical spammer, finisher spammer. Sorry, I've been talking a while, and it shows. Something like critical cards. Let's say you get a critical card on a wizard. Being able to crit with everything is new in this version, and so being able to, let's say, throw down a tornado that crits everybody in there and throws several units off of cliffs for an insta-kill is not only hilarious, but very effective. You have things like the Magi-ups and Fizz-ups, and there are some cases where spells work a particular way. Like wizards are a very standard, you gain them, you get the intelligence, you get the stats, you get the spell damage. Then you have something like ninjas where their spells are a lot more like a weapon. They're basically like throwing elemental summons at people, whatever. And by default, they kind of suck. But then you get a couple of magic cards using their very high movement. Now their movement has turned into an offensive buff for them. Combine that with a critical, now this character that really wasn't much of a caster is a ginormous insta-kill threat. At the same time, you're potentially watching for enemy units to go and do the same to you, because you don't want them getting the cards that they shouldn't be having. By that same token, you also have things like the Vartan there, who have the ability to go melee, ranged, or magic, and can combine, like, mix and match all of these different things, again, making use of their movement to go abuse the hell out of this situation. So this means that hybrids have never eaten better than this particular version. Combining all kinds of different weapon types for all kinds of different effects, different elemental coverages, different debuffs, it is a fantastic time if you're willing to pay attention, and that's really what it comes down to. You cannot just dead brain your way through this thing with just stats. I love it for that. I really wish that this is something that more people would do when playing RPGs, that it's not a damn calculator. Play the damn game to experience, the setting. It's the cool part. If you want math, just go do a damn math textbook. Anyways, sorry, apparently getting very inspired by this little squirrel I'm seeing over there. Side note, spring just hit in Michigan. It's awesome here. We have these like little black birds with these orange tips around. Very beautiful, and additionally, there's just squirrels absolutely everywhere. They're very zoomy. Very inspiring, if you will. But yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, the whole like counterattack parry build over here that continues on with all kinds of different equipment types as you on. You get stuff like this guy having a lot of elemental coverage for a lot of different things while still being a beast support, while still using things like these over here. And then you have potentially some weapon types that are going to give you skill bonuses, which then allow you to then overrank your skills. So overranking is something that was more prevalent in the PSP version, but it's more powerful here. So like, let's say you have a certain weapon type that allows you to rank your skills above their maximum. These things over here scale off of how many physical cards you took as well as your weapon skill. And so this means that you can have grenades that are capable of obscene amounts of damage, even though you only can carry a very limited amount of them. In fact, the single highest kind of like alpha strike potential in the game is the Tamer. Despite many other units having all kinds of different stats or whatever else, flat damage does not really care what your defense is. I love that in the past I've gotten angry comments stating things like, oh, well, technically the defenses do resist grenades. Yeah, sure. But going down from like 13 to 1380 after being 1400, I think we'll be fine. Like, the kinds of splitting hairs that happens over the calculations on this game is amazing to me. Like, just play it. Just, who cares if you got a nick in your rook, man? It still does the job just fine. Just play the dang chess. Anywho, all right. So, this was probably a bit of a ramble and a half. Yeah. So, that's fun. So, y'all have yourselves a good one. Thank you for stopping by. Oh wait, you know what? Shoot, I just noticed there's one more mechanic I didn't cover. The bonus system mechanic. There's a system in which if you do certain objectives in certain fights, like bringing certain classes to certain fights using certain types of abilities, most of these are fairly easy, but it basically allows you to unlock certain things at far more convenient times. Like, okay, Kashua having multiple different classes is something most people figure out by the end of the game. It's not really much of a spoiler, considering it's not really plot related, but as far as all this stuff is concerned, one of those interesting things is that a lot of these unique or bonus classes or whatever else previously were locked behind, like, just buying the guide, more or less. Like, oh, did you know you had to go through this one endgame dungeon? You had to go through there in New Game Plus in one specific level bracket and go pickpocket one specific priest at the very end of that thing that was hiding in the way, back of the party? You have no reason to ever go back there? Yeah, that's the guy you got to pickpocket to get the Dark Priest. Dude, fuck that! That's hours of effort for a class that was awful in that version. So not only are a lot of classes just way more functional across the board in this one, when you get the opportunity to get something like this, you can very realistically unlock it in your first playthrough of the story, because you do get the option to go back in time. Not really spoilers, I think everyone kind of knows that at this point. You can go back, change decisions, change the timeline, mess with the timeline, have all kinds of time paradoxes, and then that determines how your post-game's working. But things like, let's say, the Dark Priest, it specifically tells you, hey, dude, bring this character that is currently plot important. Good things will happen, okay? Just do it. And then you get the thing, because you did it. Like, it's nice, okay? It's nice that it gives you a lot of these little options, it gives you them at a more sensible time. I appreciate that. I love it. Yeah, this was your extremely unbiased, objective review of Tactics Ogre Reborn. Yeah, I guess that's the other thing. I really love the logic of like, oh yeah, no, I need an unbiased review. Let me go to the guy that has hundreds of videos on the topic. I think I like it, dude. I think we can cement that particular opinion. All right, anyways, y'all have yourselves a good one. Take care. Thank you for stopping by in this egregiously long rant. And yeah, hopefully 2026 is a better year. 2025, that thing sucked. 22 was fantastic, though. It had Tor come out. All right, y'all take care. Bye.